I just thought I was going to age out when I turned 18, and I was going to take whatever job I could and just pray to God that I don't end up homeless with my trash bag of belongings.
At age 8, Maggie Lin and her sister were separated and placed into the foster care system after being removed from an abusive family. Maggie cycled in and out of 6 different homes during her childhood.
I don't think a lot of folks fully understand what it's like to be a foster child in America. So what is it like?
You're taken from your home for one reason or another, right? Your biological parents can't care for you, or there's abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, mental, and you have to be taken out of your home and placed somewhere else. I lived in foster homes where they put locks on the fridge and the only meal we had was the free lunch at school, or families that would drop us off at the library when they went for family dinners with their biological kids. In a lot of these homes, I remember the general sense of feeling unwanted and unloved.
What kind of effect does that have on one's life?
It has made it obviously very hard to trust people, to make connections.
After aging out of the foster care system at 18, an estimated 20% of young adults become homeless. Only 50% of children will finish high school. And for those who make it to higher education, just 3% get a college degree. Maggie managed to escape those odds and earned a scholarship to Dartmouth College. She says her last foster mom in high school was very supportive and encouraged her to stay in school.
When I was in college, I did not tell a single soul I grew up in the foster care system.
What is that stigma?
The stigma is that kids that go through foster care are damaged, or that they're so traumatized, they're not normal, or they're going to take advantage of you.
After graduation, Maggie worked at a number of organizations until foster care advocate Jean Pritzker told her she was missing her calling.
She relentlessly encouraged me to make changing the foster care system my life's purpose. What was striking to me was that the foster care system hadn't really changed all that much since my time in it.
Now 33, she leads the nonprofit Foster Nation, launched in 2016.
Hi, I'm Maggie Lin, and I'm the founder and executive director of Foster Nation. Foster Nation is a nonprofit whose mission is to prepare, support, and empower foster youth aging out of the system to become self-sufficient adults by providing financial resources, social support, and mentorship. Our goal is to help foster youth navigate the transition from foster care to college and/or career.
I love this. Yay! Maggie, welcome to Minding Your Business with Jodi-Tatiana. Thank you very much for being here. The rules of the game here is I don't do any homework about who you are and what you like. I don't know anything about you. I always say that if we as human beings just walk up to people and we ask, like, what do you do? We can have a conversation and learn a lot. And for me, I want to give you the opportunity to share your story. So I don't know anything about you other than I do know what you do because I saw it somewhere. So usually my interns find it, my assistants someone finds a story or a person and they're like, Jodi, you have to talk to this person. I saw it. I don't know, I can't remember when and where, but I thought what you do was so interesting because no one ever talks about after. It's the after story. You see all these wonderful TV shows. It's a Christmas show about foster kids and adoption, but you never ever hear about the aging out system. And I love that you do that. But before we even start that, we're going to start at the very, 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 very beginning. In order to understand a business, we have to understand the person behind the business, the passion about it. So can you tell me the story of who is Maggie from, I don't know, from where are you located, but from little Maggie to, let's just say, to college.
Okay.
Or higher education or wherever you chose to go for learning.
Sure. So, love that question. I hope you have 3 days.
We have time to talk, my friend. This is why we do a long form conversation. This is not like this is a live to tape, meaning that there's no cutting. This is people hearing you.
Okay. All right. So I think my backstory is a great place to start because it perfectly segues into why I started Foster Nation. So, little Maggie, my sister Rachel and I were born and raised in Taiwan. We were put into the foster care system when I was 8 years old after we moved to the United States, specifically to California, because of family abuse. And since being in foster care, I've moved through 6 different placements, and my sister through 9. I ended up in foster care because my father was murdered when I was 1 in Taiwan, and my mother was too young to care for us. She had me when she was 15 and a half and had my sister the year after. And I share this part of the story. Obviously, I know it's very shocking, but really because I think it helps to dispel the myth that kids and youth end up in the system because they're troubled or because they're damaged, but more often than not, they're just children that did nothing wrong and ended up in foster care. So, I've lived through most of the horror stories that you hear in foster care, right? A lot of people think that children just get dropped off somewhere and the government takes care of them. And that's not always the case. A lot of times children are being physically, emotionally, or sexually abused, or in dire situations that, robs them of their childhood, such as whether it's parents with drug addictions or parents that end up going to prison, and then they get placed in these foster homes, which my sister and I lived through for almost a decade. And there were just enough cases where some of the foster parents were taking in children for the money. I'm just going to start by saying that there are great foster parents. It's not to rule them out, but there are enough parents, from my experience, I'd say a majority of them had the wrong motives for being foster parents. And so they really will do whatever it takes to make sure that they make money. So if just to go more into context of how I ended up in foster care, a lot of times kids end up in foster care because they go to school, and if there's physical abuse, teachers will notice, right? And I was taken away into foster care because I went to 2nd grade, and my uncle had taken a brick and smashed my face in. So when I went to school with a swollen face, the teacher called a social worker, and then they come in, and then and I do want to mention that when my sister and I ended up in the foster care system, we couldn't speak English yet. And so it was a very challenging time, partly because we had no idea what was happening, and we were in a foreign country, and we didn't understand a word of what anyone was saying. So, once we entered foster care, we experienced most of the horror stories you hear, right? I was at one point separated from my sister and put into different foster homes. And she was really the only person I felt I had left in the world. So that was really challenging. I lived in foster homes where they put locks on the fridge to not feed us, and the only meal we had was the free lunch at school. Or with foster families that would drop us off at the library or mall whenever they went for family dinners with their biological kids. And then there were other homes where they just made us feel like we were worthless or, second-class citizens because we were only allowed to eat the leftovers after the family had eaten. So if there was no food, then there was no food. And I know it sounds like these things only happen in the movies, but sadly, I know that this experience is real for so many of the foster youth we work with, and certainly in my own experience. So, we moved through all these placements, going into high school. I would say the scariest part was the overall feeling of hopelessness and fear when I was aging out, because it meant having no roof over my head and no support system to turn to at all, right? So typically foster youth are given a trash bag to hold their belongings and a list of shelters, and the social worker shows up, you sign a piece of paper that says, I've emancipated, and then you are basically—
Wait, we're going to stop. You just gave me a lot to unpack.
Just blaze through it. You said your childhood to
well, no, you know what? The thing is, I think that you blaze it because this is your life, and this is, you clearly shared the story many, many, many times. But I want to sit there and go back a lot.
Sure.
Okay, so I was a teacher in the Brockton Sharon school system in Massachusetts, in the Brockton school system where I taught. So I was raised in this town, Brockton, and there was the projects. I go in, so the schools that are attached to the projects, and you're doing home visits and you're doing case visits, etc. And yes, we are the teachers that we see. It's by law. By law, you're supposed to call the Department of Social Services if you see anything. It's And if you don't, I mean, like you as a teacher should be going to prison because you see something, you say something, situation. For us, we had to assess the entire situation, along with the Department of Social Services. So we weren't just like, oh my God, we saw this. So when you were younger, you could, I mean, you were born in America, you were born here. You came here at what age?
When I was 8.
You were 8. So you're 8 years old. You don't know how to speak the language. Your sister is 7 years old. You're going to school. Are the teachers able to communicate with you while you're in school?
Yeah, so I was in ESL. I was
Okay.
in an ESL class with a Chinese
So-
teacher with English.
So were you not able to communicate to them in regards of, I mean, so did they just like come in, they're like, we are like calling the services.
Yeah.
I mean, was there any communication with your mom or anything?
Yeah, so just to kind of go back and clarify, so I lost my dad, and then my mom just kind of disappeared, and so I was actually raised by my grandmother, who brought us here, and I was of course able to communicate with my grandmother, but I will say as a child, you know, I was really scared. The person who was very abusive towards us was my uncle, and I was really scared to, like, he would tell us we weren't allowed, you know, he would get angry and he would, you know, beat us. And then he would tell us that we weren't allowed to say anything. And so there was certainly an element of fear there. So could I have told my teacher? Yes, but I was more afraid of him. Also, not to mention he was in the same ESL class as I was. So because
How old was he?
He's only 3-4 years older than I am.
Wow.
Yeah. And so so we were in the same class at the same school. And so it wasn't even that, you know, I wasn't even sure that I was allowed to tell anybody, you know? And so it really wasn't until she saw, you know, the whole left side of my face was swollen. It wasn't until she asked me about it. And of course I lied, and teachers always know when you're lying because, you know, they're adults and you're a child.
Yep.
And when she could tell I was lying, she called a social worker who came to visit me at lunch during school. And then, you know, then I shared this with my grandmother, who, by the way, typical immigrant story. She was washing dishes at a local bakery under the table, can't speak English, obviously. And so, you know, we were just trying to keep a very low-key profile.
What happened when the social workers took you away, and what was your grandmother's reaction, if you remember?
Yeah, so the second time that the first time they came to visit, they checked everything out, and there wasn't really anything they could find. You know, it's a proper home, everything was fine. And, you know, and the only thing, the second time it happened was when my sister, one of her organs had ruptured from the abuse, and she ended up in the hospital. And so I actually was at the hospital with my sister and my grandmother. And my grandmother, actually, honestly, I don't know that anyone communicated to her. She also doesn't speak English. And a social worker just came and literally dragged me out of the hospital. And I will say, and this is nothing to do with, this was just more that all of America was a foreign place to me. But that social worker was African American, and coming from a small village in Taiwan, I had never seen anyone my whole life. And I was just so confused, so scared by the whole experience. And that was my first foster care placement as well. And it was on top of being, you know, and I share this because I think it really is important and incumbent upon the child welfare services to place kids, especially when they don't speak English and they're so young and frightened, where at least there's some representation. And so, you know, in the first few homes that I lived in, they couldn't speak Chinese and I couldn't speak English. And again, I had never seen anyone African American my whole life. And I was so scared that I actually, I was really young, but I remember trying to run away, and she lived on the second floor of an apartment building, and I was trying to jump off the balcony. And she caught me just in time because, you know, I was just so scared. And not that I would have known where to run to, but it was better than just not knowing and staying still with a total stranger.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, you just like explained it very well. What I was going to ask you, like, what was that first moment of you are away from your sister, your sister's still in the hospital, your grandmother has no idea what's going on. I'm sure they did not explain to her what was going on. They go, you're by yourself. Were you able to actually ever see your grandmother or your sister? Or how did that even, because you're in foster care, I mean, depending on the situation, you're able to have a visitation. So how was that for you for your first home?
Yeah. So honestly, I was not in the first home for very long. And the first home was an interesting one because I'm pretty sure, now looking back and piecing together all the pieces, I'm pretty sure she was divorced or something because I saw photos of her own kids and all of that, but she was an alcoholic, and that much I remember. And so I think I was there for maybe 2 weeks, and I woke up and I was covered in bed bug bites because the place was not very clean. And so I ended up actually getting placed to another location. But there was no visitation in that first 2 weeks, probably because it was just so short. And my grandmother was probably just trying to figure out how everything was falling apart. She is her youngest granddaughter who's, undergoing like a surgery, and she's at 7 probably at the time, right? And I'm gone. And then her son, who is 12 at the time, is home alone, and so there were just a lot of pieces. And for somebody who is uneducated and, having done what she was able to do at the time is, to me, like a total miracle. Having, because she ended up putting my uncle in military school, just to kind of course correct. And
well, I was gonna say, did she realize that he was the cause?
Yes, for sure. She knew that. I think it was just she didn't realize the extent to which his anger translated into, he would get bullied at school, right?
Yeah.
So from his perspective, and this is not to make excuses for my uncle, and we have somewhat of a relationship now, but he was completely taken out of his world, really because of me and my sister. And he was just really angry. He went from this little place that he was very comfortable in to being bullied every day at school and just not fitting in. And then so he would literally just turn around and bully us.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that he didn't know what he was doing, but I mean, he was also a child. And so that was a very challenging thing to kind of reconcile, because, he was family, and my grandmother lived in the same household. So she sort of knew, but also what more could she do, right? Like, she would of course punish him, but then what else could she do if she was working like 12 hours,
But what you said was so right, because I mean, your mother had you when you were young. He was the younger brother. And so his entire realm of like, what is happening in my life, where your grandmother probably focused on your mom a lot because your mom was younger. She probably had the two of you guys, so she was probably putting all her attention towards towards your mom. And then your brother, her brother was like, what about me? I'm here too. And so when she left, and then these two little girls are there, your grandmother again is focusing on you, trying to make sure that everything comes together. And he's like, again, round 2, what about me?
Yes. Yeah. It's a combination of that. And for sure, I think, being an immigrant in America, and, now it's funny because I know I'm an immigrant, first generation, but I don't really think about it that way because I'm so Americanized. But, it's almost like a chapter of my life that I've completely forgotten. But I do, have a soft spot for people who, you're kind of braving a new world, and it is very challenging. And it is something that I think, for my uncle at the time, because he was a child, was really, really hard. And there was really no way to kind of let that anger and frustration out. Because I will say, culturally in Asia, therapy and all things social emotional is not a big part of our culture. So
it's not even just like in the Asian countries, but it's more so like, I'm from the West Indies. I'm first generation born in America to Haitian parents. You don't discuss. I mean, it's like, I can talk to all my global friends and we all have the same thing that we say, like, no one discussed that. It's just not something that's talked about. You're fine, read a book, get a great education, become a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer, kind of a thing. But it's one of those moments where it's not discussed when something is a little bit off of someone, and you're like, I go, no, they're fine. And then when it's too late, they're like, everyone tries to jump in and fix it, but it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of our ending up in foster care was a little bit of this like too late situation, and once we got taken away, there was nothing my grandmother could do to get us back. And so she ended up going back to Taiwan, and my uncle basically stayed in military school until he graduated high school. And then he also moved back to Taiwan. But yeah.
Did you guys, while you were in the foster care system, did you guys know that they left the country at that point?
Yes. So while we were in the system, we were in some homes, and then there was one kinship care. So it was a distant relative, which is my grandmother's older sister, who had immigrated here like 20 years prior to our even coming. And so whenever we were there, we were able to communicate with her. We knew what was happening. But outside of that, when we were being placed in other homes, had zero communication. I mean, I was just so young. I didn't even have my numbers. Like, you know, I didn't have like my grandmother's number. I didn't have anyone's number. The only number I remembered was my grandmother's sister's home. And I still remember it to this day, you know, but outside of that, I had no news of my family. And in fact, my grandmother had, you know, and my aunt and, you know, back in Taiwan basically didn't hear from me for about a decade.
Wow. When did your sister and you get connected? Because you said that you were in different, so you were in different places, but were you ever together?
So we were together for the most part. They did separate us for a year. So after her surgery was done, in third grade, we started moving placement to placement together. And then right after seventh grade was over, I just lived in this terrible home and I was so over it. And I really wanted to go back to this kinship care situation. And my sister just loved her friends, but also this other foster girl had moved into the home that she felt very protective of. This young, also immigrant Asian girl who was raped by her uncle. And at the time she was in sixth grade and she couldn't speak English. And my sister was kind of like her older sister and just felt very responsible for her. Whereas I think for me, I was very like head down focused on just taking care of me and my sister. My sister was, you know, looking for someone younger to also take care of. And so she was like, I can't move, I'm not moving. So she ended up staying and then they kicked them both out. And so both of them moved together to another foster home. And then from there, they separated them and moved my sister to two other foster care placements that were just horrific, one of which was a group home.
Were you able to see her during that time?
So my social worker never offered to take me. I had a kind of distant relative that at the time had met us when he was in high school and he was going to Berkeley. And so whenever he would come back, he must have heard our story from a relative or something, but whenever he would come back from college to visit, he would check in on us. So he would, you know, he wanted to know where we were. He was kind of like a CASA, you know, that's an organization that, you know, that does incredible work with kids while they're still in the system. And I was never assigned a CASA, I don't think, and I didn't have one, but he was kind of like that. He would check in on us. And when we were separated, because he had a car, he would pick me up and then drive me to visit my sister. And I had basically visited her in two of the three placements. I visited her in two of the three placements. And I will say that's the first time when we were separated that I had seen her, and I was really concerned because I could tell something had snapped. Like her social, emotional, mental, psychological was just not in a good place. And, you know, she was always a happy kid despite everything that was happening because I did.
She had you.
Yeah, exactly. To shelter her from everything. And she was always so happy-go-lucky. And I used to look at her and almost admire that. Like, why am I not that way? I just think so much and I'm so complicated. And she was just, if she was happy, she was happy. If she was sad, she was sad. She could express her emotions. Yeah. And this was the first time I was really concerned. And I think the reality is, having been through these experiences, I think that all of us have some sort of, you know, genetic predisposition to certain, you know, maybe mental health related things, but it's really life's events that trigger them, if ever at all, right? And so I think that was a moment in which I saw it trigger for her when she didn't have me around, and then she was on her own and living in a group home, and, you know, and having to, it was probably a really scary transition for her. And, you know, she's not very expressive and she keeps everybody at arm's length and she doesn't trust anyone. And I think a big part of that is because she didn't have the resiliency at that moment, because I did it for her all the time. And then they all of a sudden separated us. And that was a very challenging thing. And, you know, even now I think she deals with a little bit of more of the mental health issues than I do, as far as, you know, depression goes and some of those types of disorders.
You are the age of 16, 17. You know the system very well at this point, and you know what's going to happen coming soon. So take me to from 16 years old, where are you? And then what happens from 16 to when you, I don't want to say start the business, because it's like 16 to that first career job.
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say it really wasn't until my sophomore year in high school that I met someone who was my last foster mom and mentor that helped me understand that I could choose a path and create the life that I wanted. You know, I feel very lucky to have met the right person at the right time, because she let me know that I was smart and could go to any college I wanted. Even though that doesn't sound like much, you have to understand that no one had ever told me that before, not my social worker or any of the foster parents I lived with. So as a kid, I knew I was always in the, you know, kind of in the gifted program or in the advanced program, but I didn't know that meant it translated to anything. And so even though all the odds were stacked against me, I aged out when I turned 18, and then I got a full ride and went to Dartmouth, you know, being the first person in my family to go to college and then graduate from college. And so college was a whole other journey that I had, because I think it was a very shocking thing for me to go from where I lived. And again, this was the longest time. I moved every 2-3 years. So this was the longest time I was set in one place. College is 4 years. And I was like, wait, what? I don't have to move. But of course, as ironically in the way that life plays out, I ended up going on all sorts of study exchange where I couldn't even stay still. Like, I had normalized moving around, that staying still was probably uncomfortable for me. And I really wanted to take advantage of every opportunity I had to see the world, and also to try and understand all the things that happened to me and why. And so that's how I ended up majoring in philosophy. So yeah, I mean, after kind of leading up into my first job, so I graduated from Dartmouth with a degree in philosophy, and my first job took me to India, where I worked for the United Nations. I worked for the chairman, Dr. Pachauri, the chairman of the IPCC for the UN, and that was kind of the thing that took me out of this country. And looking back, of course, I realized that I was trying to run as far away from my memories in foster care by going first to the furthest college from LA County as possible. I mean, Dartmouth was no joke as far as like getting there. You know, you have to fly into Boston Logan, then you have to take a 2-hour bus to get there. And then the winters, like all of that. I was just trying to get as far away. And then after college, you know, I mean, I can't think of a further country from the US than India. So
wait, pause for a second. While you were in college, what countries did you visit and why did you pick them?
Sure. So while I was in college, I did a lot of kind of, you know, and just to touch on also the college experience for foster youth. Over summers and winter breaks and spring breaks, like, you really have to think about what you're going to do, right? You don't go home like everybody else. And you know, I was very lucky that I had my last foster mom is like, you know, if you need to come home, like, this is home. But at the same time, I was so used to being independent that I wanted to take advantage of the opportunities that I had. So let's see, I studied abroad in Edinburgh, Scotland. I studied philosophy there. Then I studied abroad in Taiwan, in southern Taiwan, because I wanted to just, you know, get closer to my roots. I didn't mention this, but I minored in Asian, Middle Eastern languages and literature. So I studied in Taiwan for a semester. And then I also studied in China at Beijing Normal University for another semester, and I was studying Chinese. So aside from that, I did a lot of traveling, you know, I went to DC and worked on homeless issues during one spring break through Tucker Foundation, which is a kind of like a nonprofit impact organization within the college.
Yeah.
And then I also spent 3 weeks in Nicaragua, and I brought the medical team to Nicaragua to just, you know, address some medical needs and concerns in rural villages. So those were some of the places I went. I'm trying to think if there were more. I think that's it.
Maggie, you could have gone in so many different directions. I mean, there are the pros and the cons of being a foster child. I mean, you hear them all the time, and I mean, and obviously people glamorize the kids that like got out and they did wonderful things. You're definitely one of them, but you could have chosen not to go to school. Yes, I'm smart, but you could have chosen to go so many different routes other than all these amazing things that you just like rambled on. Like you just like went down the list of I'm sorry, you're a badass. I don't know if you know this. You're a badass, my friend. And I go, you've done so many things because you're giving back. You could have just taken a job where I'm going to work for the financial, where I'm going to work for a marketing firm. I could have worked for someone, just do my job, get paid, have my home, boom. You took on the jobs of helping the other humans. Why do you think you went that route versus, I mean, like you went to Dartmouth. I know where that is. I go there often because it's a cute little diner that I go there because my cousin goes to Vermont Law School. So like when you're in the plaza, so like there's a hotel here and there's a cute little diner. All right, so you're looking at the tower, you're the hotel, and then it's right on the corner. And I'm like, I forgot the name of it. We go there. We're going Saturday, actually.
I know what you're talking about. It's something coffee. I know what you're talking about.
Yes. It's always a huge line. During COVID, there was like, they made these cute little tents. But I know, like literally this Saturday, we're going there because he just graduated in May, and it's our last final, I'm so sad moment of being at the Dartmouth campus. I know it's so beautiful. I mean, so you were in this epically beautiful town, this college town, where it is literally, the cold is no joke, because you go down that valley. I'm driving in from Massachusetts, and I'm like, I go, okay, it's cold, and you dip into this valley in Royalston, and I'm like, holy crap, it just went down 20 degrees. What the hell? It's like, and this huge cloud covering of just, I don't know, something's just happening where it's just locked into right there. So you come from California, you are now in colder than cold. You take on the task of like, these are the majors that I'm going to take on. I want to help people, but you could have used this in any place. You could have been a lawyer and just done it there. Why did you choose this route of education? Why did you choose these jobs to help humankind?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because you don't get to think about these questions very often.
That's why I like doing a long-form conversation, because no one ever, like, you gotta dig in.
I love it. So I will say my goal with being a philosophy major was eventually to go to law school. I had instilled in me as a child a very, very, I would gravitate towards this idea of fairness, you know, what is just, right? And I think that was instilled in me because of the way that my father was murdered, everything I knew about the court case as a child, and it just kind of was always a nugget in the back of my mind. And I will say my approach to life is a little bit different than most people, probably because of my experience. But you know, I kind of set my sights on something, but then I choose to remain open to opportunities. So a lot of times when I talk about, you know, how I ended up doing this or how I ended up doing that, I always say the best things happen by accident, which means I was just open. I was just, you know, when this came up, I read an email about it. Somebody told me about it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to apply because this sounds interesting. And this, you know, this is something that for me, I think I was the recipient, very much like on the receiving end of the kindness of strangers. And I actually call them guardian angels because I think back on some of these people and I don't remember their names. I don't know who they are, what their roles were. For example, we would all get bussed, all the foster kids would get picked up and bussed to children's court, you know, every few months. And my sister and I, because we were such anomalies, we would always get like the the people working there would always like give us an extra helping of lunch, or give us an extra teddy bear in the court when we were scared. So it's like these little things, like my elementary school teachers who would let me stay 2 to 3 hours longer after school to do my homework because I didn't want to go home, right? Or my principal or the secretary at the school, who I remember, the principal once took us to Knott's Berry Farm, and my 5th grade teacher once took us to Six Flags, and these are people who, I mean, now I'm sure that, it actually breaks my heart to think now that would be like so illegal in every possible way. You would never do that. I mean, my sister and I, obviously very lucky, but nothing happened to us. And in those cases, they did something that for me, I carried throughout childhood as a reminder that people cared. And so those things are really important. It's just really unfortunate that, in today's climate, like that would be so inappropriate, but it is the kindness of strangers. I think that, because I've been on the receiving end, it means a lot to me to be able to be also on this side, which is, to be able to give.
I think that's one of the things that makes me so happy to hear, because I was just always told in life that you can do anything, but also I was also told, as you're learning and as you're doing everything, you have to give back. It's an automatic, it's a sin to literally die in this earth with all this knowledge that you've acquired and not give back to society. It just doesn't make sense. And so I love that you were able to absorb all this information, absorb all this kindness from other people, and turn that around and find your own ways of giving back, which is absolutely amazing. Because you could, again, there's so many ways that you could just like, I'm going to just package everything. I'm going to put it behind me. I'm not going to think about it. And I'm going to just like really, really focus on making sure that I can take care of number one. And you went the other route. Was your sister able to do the same?
I think my sister she was always more focused on just surviving, and I was too, by the way. I would say maybe in the last few years have I decided, okay, you know what, I like survival mode. I can put that to bed. And I feel like I'm still kind of untangling that a little bit in my adult life, I will say. I mean, so many of the tools that we use to survive childhood, sometimes it's scary to let them go, because you're like, this is how I survived, right? And so, and I share this because my sister, I think, always had to look out for herself. I mean, she had me, but then she wasn't in the habit of like having to take care of somebody else. And so I think for her, it was just, there were already enough struggles, quite frankly, to get through on her own, that I couldn't solve for her. Things like, she dealt with depression, and she dealt with kind of bipolar disorder. But I think a lot of that was more tied to her, the trauma, than it was to just like, she was never like this as a child, right? So I think that's where she focused a lot of her efforts, was just like, for her, sometimes getting up in the day was challenging, looking herself in the mirror was challenging. And so I think she and I, despite going through roughly the same things in life, took away from those experiences in a very different way. And I think, she's finally at a point where she's allowing herself to go through that healing process, which I think is really, incredible. And I share this because, look, she's 32 years old, and, it's, when you have childhood trauma, or when you go through something like the foster care system, you don't really age out of anything, right? Like, you don't age out of trauma. You don't age out of needing help and resources and needing to know that somebody's in your corner just because you turn 18 or 21 years old, which is really what the government says. When you age out, you're done. Like, you have no more resources, or very little resources. And a lot of times organizations will say like, okay, well, you're 28, like, you're a grown ass person, you should be able to do this. You should be able to be functional. You should be able to write this proper email. It's like, well, if you were never taught that, how are you supposed to know, right? And so I think, she's finally getting to a point where she just got married, and she's in a great place. And by the way, she is perfectly functional. It's not like, those things that debilitated her. She went to Vassar, she majored in education, she was a school teacher for many years. She taught in DC and overseas in Taiwan at a international school for almost 4 years. So she's perfectly functional. You know, we're both survivors in that way, but I think she just wasn't as able to look beyond all the things that she didn't have and all the things that happened to her. I think she was very much victimized, and we both were, but I think that's just like I put it on like genetic, chemistry, makeup, whatever it is, but we're just very different. You know, I'm very optimistic and she's very pessimistic, or she would say realistic. And
it was so funny because like I have a sister, and I'm telling you, you're just describing it so well, where the glass is always overflowing in my world. I trust everyone until you do me wrong, and then I don't. I mean, I don't give second chances.
I'm the same way.
Because the thing is, I go, it's exhausting to give second chances in my world. It has to be a big deal for me to give you a second chance. And for her, she walks in like, I go, I trust nobody. My glass is not full. And she's like, I mean, she's laser focused on her mission, and she's great at that. And I'm laser focused on my mission, and I'm great at that. But we see the world in a whole different way. We see the way that we grew up in a different way. We see relatives in a different way. It's so surprising to me when your siblings, same blood, and yet you're like, I go, we're so different. And I'm like, it's not just me, because when you're younger, you're just thinking it's just us, and it's not really just us.
Yeah.
Can you just clarify once again? So you're starting to age out, but you go to college. Like, I feel like that there's a little spot that you didn't talk about. So your sister is in one location, you're in one location, you're aging out, but you end up going to great schools. How does that happen in between? Like, because your foster mother said you can come home, but it's your home, but it's not your home, and you're very independent. So were you with her when you hit 18 and then you got to college?
Yeah. So when you turn 18 and graduate from high school, there's this summer, right? We had a very special case. We were very lucky. Had it not been for this home, we would have really had nowhere to go for the summer before college, which is true for a lot of foster youth, right? And then once they get themselves to college, that's a whole nother thing. It's like figuring out where I'm going to go in the summers. Sometimes people turn back to their neighborhoods or the streets or whatever it is, you know, couch surfing on friends' couches. And then beyond that, you know, once I think it's the aging out process that's really scary, because, you know, my sister and my story is very unique in the sense that, you know, 10% of foster youth go to college, 1 to 3% graduate from college. So we're looking at 90% of foster youth who end up in prison, homeless, getting trafficked. And that kind of runs the whole gamut of it. So I always say foster care is a pipeline into all these other, you know, systems, which is like, it's like a never ending cycle. And so I think for us, we were, again, very lucky, but typically when you age out, you're handed a trash bag, list of homeless shelters, and just good luck with your life. And that's it. So now imagine, you know, moving through 40, 50 homes before you even turn 18 years old. And now somebody's just, here you go. And then
is there a process, as in, do they walk you through what you should, like, here, I mean, you have a bag, but I mean, is there a signing of something? Is there some stipend, like a stipend of money or something?
Yeah, Jodi, so they don't give you, there's no money to be given. That doesn't happen. They've spent it otherwise on other things, not sure what, but you sign a piece of paper that says I've emancipated. And
from the foster home that you're in.
Yes, your social worker comes, you sign this piece of paper. You know, maybe a couple months before, maybe a year before, you go through this thing called the ILP program, which is the independent living program. Mm-hmm. And what you theoretically are supposed to learn is all of the things about being an adult, independent living, right? So balancing a checkbook, budgeting, safe sex, and like housing, all of that. But the issue is they bust you into this local community school or local church. There's a facilitator or administrator who's very uninspired, right? So now you have all these kids who have a high trauma, high everything, ADHD, whatever, you name it. Yep. And we're stuck in there for between 4 to 6 hours. And everyone's like throwing like paper balls at each other. No one's paying attention. And then at the end of it, you're handed a stack this thick of an instruction manual on everything, like how to apply for a credit card, how to. Now imagine being 16 or 17 years old, going through all that in 4 to 6 hours,
Yeah.
being given a stack. And quite frankly, I would say 99.9% of the kids go because they incentivize you by giving you $40. And $40 is a lot when you have nothing, right? So you go through that, that's about a day, and then you're done. Literally you're done. Like when you turn 18, you sign this piece of paper, they give you, more packets of information.
Yeah.
But if you're in a home where the minute the government stops paying you, they want you out, you are literally like, where are you reviewing this? Like sitting on a park bench, that's really what happens. I mean,
this is like so. I mean, like, it's not that I didn't know about this, but this is so absolutely insane because you're sending me into a course about how to apply for a credit card. I don't have any credit. How am I going to apply for a credit card if I don't have any credit? And then you're thinking about, I mean, and the focus of finding me a place like, is there a hotel? Is there a place I can get a job? Like, there are more realistic traits that I should be learning, but how to get a credit card is not it. Or, by the way, this individual will kick you out within hours of you signing this paper of your 18th birthday. What will you do? These are the steps that you should prepare for, or phone numbers that you should call.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenging thing is, that's just like, we're talking about hard skills. Now we're glossing over all of the soft skills that are required to survive and be a functioning adult in the world, which is communication, responsibility, and all of the virtues that you need really to show up and access resources and how to ask for help, all of these things. So and that's not even looking at the social, emotional, psychological trauma repair, if that's a whole nother subject.
So you're in college, you graduate from college, you have these different jobs. When does the company start? When do you decide I'm going to take this on this is now going to be something that I'm going to take all the knowledge that I've had, from like young, from college, everything. Like, how does it all develop?
Sure. So I, after India, I ended up staying in India for about 3.5 years. I loved it so much. So I ended up working for a software technology company that was fighting counterfeit drugs in Southeast Asia and India. Then I worked in the hospitality industry for this Bollywood celebrity socialite. And
wait, I'm just going to keep reminding you, you're a badass, right? Badass, dude. What? These jobs are crazy amazing. This is insane.
I know. I will say a big part of it is, again, and I say this over and over again whenever I speak to any, young person who's willing to listen and take nuggets of advice from me, that you really have to be open to opportunities, so long as you're willing to work hard and learn really quickly. And a big part of that is attention to detail, is being able to focus on the task at hand. But that has served me so well, because all of these opportunities, and knock on wood, I've been very fortunate that I've never had to apply for a job by sending in a resume. That's very, very fortunate. It's always, I meet somebody, I'm able to have a conversation, inspiring enough conversation with them that then, I get a card, and then it's asking for help, right? It's putting things out into the universe so people can actually step up to help you. And then, especially for somebody who has experienced foster care, it's being open to being helped, right? Knowing that like being helped isn't weak. It's just that you didn't get dealt some cards that other people had, right? And so, while I was working in this hospitality job and I was, running this guy's restaurant, I met a professor that was at the Jindal Business School on an exchange program, who went to Harvard Business School, and he was doing research on repatriate entrepreneurship. So all of the Indians during the brain drain that left India because there were no opportunities, that were now coming back because of opportunities that were now new given all of the different changes happening in India. And it was a very exciting research project because I got to really spend a lot of time coding how successful entrepreneurs got to where they are, right? And so that was, I think I've always been interested in entrepreneurship in some ways. As a child, I was very much an inventor of sorts. But I will say, I think in order to be an entrepreneur, it really requires a certain level of safety net. And I'll touch on this a little bit when it comes to starting Foster Nation, because I consider Foster Nation like a startup in its own ways, because you really have to think about it like a business. But
I always have to remind people that nonprofit, for-profit, it's a business. You still have to do marketing. You still have to do operations. You still have to hire. People automatically like assume that I'm going to sit there and hide behind the nonprofit word. But guess what? Hospitals are nonprofits. Schools are nonprofits. I go, Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, the foundation, it's a nonprofit. So I'm happy you just said that out loud, where it is a business that you are running. And in order for it to succeed, you have to be able to know all elements of the business.
Yes, absolutely. And so, so after that, I ended up just, when I was doing that research, I found it super fascinating, but I ended up moving to Mongolia for 6 months. And the thing that led me to leaving India was because I got dengue fever, and that was like the most painful thing I had experienced. And then I also learned that it stays in your system. You don't build immunity to it. The next time you get it, you could die. It's a whole thing. So, so I'm like, okay, I think it's time to get out of here. I moved to Mongolia and work with this woman who had started a nonprofit in the slums on the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar. And then winter rolled around. I was there for 6 months and was helping her with a couple things related to fundraising. And then when winter rolled around and I think it was like November and it was 11 degrees, I was like, okay, it's time to go. So I went back to LA and worked at CAA in the foundation for a short stint. I was there for 5 months and realized really quickly that that was not what I wanted to do. And again, every single thing I'm mentioning has been just things that open up conversations with people that are just like, okay, you're like, how do we plug you in here? And while I was at CAA, a really good friend of mine from high school just became the CEO of a tech startup. And he and I met his investor randomly, like at the airport. We started talking and he was like, wow, you're really smart. Like, I want you to work at any startup I've invested in. And so this one made sense. And so I ran strategic partnerships for this tech company that was working with the NFL players and their foundations. So a lot of this, the common thread in it has always been, I think purpose and contribution is really important to me. So there has to be some element of knowing that I'm contributing and that there's impact in what I'm doing. And it doesn't always have to be nonprofit. None of those companies I worked for were nonprofits before. I, again, happened into the nonprofit space. I was trying to run away, I mentioned earlier, from foster care for so long that of course I would somehow end up in it. This is just the way life goes. But as fate and luck would have it, I ended up meeting my mentor and someone who's like a fairy godmother to me, Jeannie Pritzker, who really encouraged me to make changing the foster care system my life's purpose. I mentioned earlier that to be an entrepreneur, I think that you need a certain level of a safety net, and I don't mean financial safety net. I mean an emotional and psychological safety net to know that if you failed, even if you failed and you had to live in the basement of your parents' home, like at least you have the basement of your parents' home, right? When you grow up in foster care, that is not an option. There aren't that many places that even in a basement that you can go to. And so it was really with her support and love that, I learned really quickly that the foster care system hadn't changed one bit in the last decade since I aged out, and that blew my mind. For me, I'm such a problem solver, and that question of, how could a system that affects nearly 500,000 innocent kids and youth not have improved at all? And because those stats hadn't really changed in over a decade, I was like, wait a minute. And so that's kind of how Foster Nation came about.
Are you doing it when you started? Was it solo? Was it, did you find a group of people to come together? Like, I go, how did you create it? Because, and I ask that question where there are so many people out there that are wanting to they want to own their own. They want to own their own thing. They want to solve their own problem. And they are so fearful of the word. I mean, like you said, to be an entrepreneur is so scary. I work with startups every day. I mean, I mentor a lot of people, and the chutzpah, the balls on the people that I work with is amazing. And people on the peripheral are like, I want to be an entrepreneur so badly. I go, it is not an easy task. It is not an easy place to be. if you want to be throat punched every day, boom, it's the place for you. So can you give some advice to someone that is looking to start, but is thinking, this is overwhelming? Like, how was it for you where you had been in all these different organizations, being a changer? Like, you love a part of your legacy at all of these different places because you had such passion for what you were doing. How do you find that passion for what you're doing, and how do you keep it going, and how do you even start?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I know that the whole concept of things happen by accident is probably not a good. Well, I think all of life bifurcates a little, right? It's like it's either by design or by accident, and I think a big part of starting is really you have to be comfortable talking a lot about what you're doing, and you have to be so passionate about. I just happen to be one of those people. If I read a book, if I discover a new recipe, if I discover a new TaskRabbit or a new Airbnb, like the whole world needs to know about it. Like even the random guy at the bar sitting next to me, that's like, he's like, I'm just here to have a drink. Like, why are you telling me about this book? That's just who I am. And so I think you really have to practice that, right? Like if you don't already have that, it just requires practice. And even now, being kind of a professional mentor to our program manager, who's a bit younger than I am, but her goal ultimately is to be an executive director of a nonprofit organization. She has her MSW, she's very qualified, but I think that's a soft skill that is very critical to starting anything. I think an organization, a company, and I've been at many startups, and a big part of it again is that pitch, is how you communicate and how passionate you are about it, right? And as far as just to touch on passion, as far as figuring out, a way to not lose it, trust me, like there are days when I'm like doing such tedious, never ending, long list of to-do tasks, things like insurance and legal stuff and like reviewing like a 40-page document, working on the curriculum that is like 70 pages, that I'm like, I really can't, like, I'm done. I'm like, how do a big part of making sure you don't lose the passion is making sure that you always have a hand in the population or the client that you're trying to serve. So outside of just doing all the tedious things, which I have to do as the executive director, if I were the program manager of an organization, I'm the boots on the ground, right? I would probably get to speak more to the people that we work with, whether it's an end user, a person who's buying your product, or the foster youth that we serve. I think it is very important every so often to kind of step away from your desk and your to-do list, just to remind yourself why you're doing the things that you're doing. Because you're right, you can't, there's so much that goes into it. And I will just say also right now that particularly with nonprofits, whenever people reach out to me for advice, they want to schedule a call to talk through, they're thinking about starting a nonprofit that does this. I always take those calls, even though I have so many meetings that I'm like, those are the meetings that I would prefer not to take, because it takes me away from all the work that I have to do. But I almost always take those calls because the first piece of advice I give to people is don't start your own nonprofit. It's not to discourage everyone who's passionate about what they do, but before you do, really do a competitive landscape. I know that it's odd to even hear the word competitive in the nonprofit space, because I don't think there should be any competition, but that's my point, is if an organization in your local area or nationally or whatever is already doing something you're doing, don't go and start another nonprofit just to put your name on it, or just to put a cool name that you've thought of on it, right? Like, go to an existing organization. If you're going to dedicate all that time anyway to not getting paid, or getting paid very little, you might as well go to an organization that already exists, that already has the structures in place, and just saying, hey, I have this idea for a program. I would really love to run it by you, put together a proper plan, and say, I would literally run this whole thing. Like, all you have to do is bring me in, and I would run this particular, maybe it's, let's say that this person specifically wants to address making sure foster youth when they age out, have a suitcase instead of a trash bag, right?
Yeah.
Like, go to an organization that already works with foster youth. Just as an example, we work with 57 colleges in the state of California, right?
Mhm.
So we have those relationships built already, and that takes years to build, right? So if you want to do that, instead of starting an organization, spending a year or two of your time and all of that trying to establish those relationships, setting up the infrastructure, applying for a 501c3, go and find an organization like ours or anyone else that you align with and say, hey, I think this is really critical. You guys are addressing this population, and here's a pain point that they're dealing with. I want to help solve that. So can I set up the suitcase program, within Foster Nation? We are all, like, as an organization, and I drill this into the program manager all the time, we are almost always, with very small exceptions, almost always open to collaboration and working on something together. Like, our goal is not to reinvent the wheel if it already exists.
I love it. All right, so let's walk us through what happens when we're coming through your organization. How does one find you? How does this work from beginning to whenever it ends?
Sure. Okay. So, as an organization, I think, I mentioned earlier what our mission was, right? Our mission is really to engage the community to provide resources, social support, and mentorship to help foster youth become self-sufficient. And so our overarching mission is really to help foster youth know that success is not impossible, even if they were dealt a horrible hand. And because the hardest part particularly is when they turn 18 and have to age out, that's the population that we've chosen to work with. And, I mentioned earlier, but we serve foster youth ages 18 to 30 across 57 colleges in California. And we're always looking for more partnerships. And just to give you kind of a scale, our current partnerships span across 12 counties in California, and the students we serve live in over 440 zip codes, primarily in LA County, because it's the largest demographic of foster youth in the country. And we're in the developmental phases of launching partnerships with school districts in the County of Education to serve foster youth in high school, just in that 2 to 3 year critical pivotal inflection point before they age out, right? Because once they age out, it's like, now they're scrambling. We're going to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're scrambling for the very basic bottom, which is, how do I get my basic needs met? How do I make sure I have a roof, I have food, I have water, right? That it's so hard to focus on even thinking about a career. But at the same time, the only way to fulfill that very bottom thing is to have a career. And so that's kind of our goal, is really to be in that transitional period and then provide ongoing support, of course, once they've aged out. And so the way that our organization works is we have one cornerstone program, which we just launched in April, called Career X. And, most of our programs exist not just to address basic needs, but we do have basic needs program like Meal Nation, which is food insecurity, is a food insecurity program. And then we have Career X, which is our career mentorship program. And we have other things like basic needs, making sure they have clothing that they need for career, all things related to career. And then also celebratory things, right? This is the fluffy things that people don't really want to talk about or fun, but at the same time, it's so important for foster youth, I think, once they go into the real world, to know that there's somebody who cares about them, even if they don't know who that is. So graduation gifts, birthday gifts, holiday gifts. And but with Career X, which is our cornerstone program, it's really to open up doors to better paying jobs and promising career paths post college or post foster care. And our goal is to really help them develop the skills, social networks, and the confidence that they need to enter the workforce in adulthood. So really, what I mentioned earlier about ILP, that ILP program, our goal is to be able to supplement that. And instead of saying like, okay, you're going to learn this in 4 to 6 hours in one day, it's a 9-month program, and a foster youth is matched with it's a one-on-one match with a career coach who's a volunteer mentor, who is given a playbook with 27 pre-built lesson plans already. And all of that covers from, educational attainment, degree completion, career readiness, financial literacy, soft skills, adulting. There's a whole module on just adulting. Like organizing your identification documents, you know,
Yeah.
foster youth don't have access to that. And how do you be a member of society if you don't even have an identity, right? And these are all the little things that seem like it's not a big deal, but, you know, try going to a DMV and getting a state ID so you can apply for a job when you don't have access to your birth certificate or your social security card, right? Because you didn't have a parent and it's not in your parent's safe, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, our goal in the build out of this program was really twofold. One, of course, to support the foster youth, and the second to eliminate any barriers to entry for professional volunteers that might need more guidance, right? A lot of people go, like, you know, if I ask you, do you have mentors? Probably, right? But if I ask you, will you mentor me? You're like, okay, well, what does that mean? How do I mentor you? What does that entail? What do you need, right? And so our goal was to take all the questions out and to really bridge that gap, right? There are people who want to support foster youth, who maybe don't know what it means to be a mentor. And this playbook addresses that, right? It's 27 lesson plans. They meet 3 times a month for 9 months. And all you have to do is show up. And it's not hard. You know, one lesson is like, Jodi, today we're just going to clean up your digital presence. Let's talk about your email address. Like, Hot Girl 99 is not going to be great when you're applying for a job.
Yeah.
It's little things like that they don't know that are really important to address, but just to be able to.
FYI, a lot of people that are like, you know, that are not in the foster care, they don't know that either.
Right. Exactly. And this is kind of, you know, this is a lot of feedback. I will say we've been sharing this with a lot of potential corporate sponsors and partners, and a lot of them look at this and they go, wait a minute, you know, and I can show you the curriculum. I might have already sent it to you, but it's, you know, each square is a module and you can see every single thing that's covered. And they're like, wait a minute, I could have used this when I was 18, 21, or even.
Honest to goodness. I mean, look, that's the thing where like you designed it for the foster care system, but honestly, every kid in high school, I mean, could use something like that. I mean, and finding a mentor, I mean, I've been mentoring for 30 plus years. And I always tell people, Mike, honestly, I go personal brand, apprenticeship or internship, and then a mentorship or being a mentor. I go, that's like a huge thing. Okay, so wait, you just told me you have a short limited time. So I go, this is a very transparent in every single way. But you're saying it's your fault because you're saying so many amazing things.
I know. All right. We could do like a part 2 situation.
I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 because we need to dive into where do we go from here in regards of the entire essence of we'll call it the foster care system. I mean, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pause it. I go, and we're gonna do part 2 because I think that is gonna be such a meaty conversation because it's a big problem and you have stats, you have numbers, you have everything that people need to understand. And I'm not going to let you go. And we're not going to answer it in 8 minutes. So I'm going to pause. Yay. Right. So pausing. So this is the only time that we're going to edit because we're going to glue it together. But I'm going to pause right now. All right. So this is take 2 because Maggie had to go. She had to she's like a very important person. She had to go. We're doing take 2 to bring her back to and we have one major question, and then we have our 2 lasting questions. So here we go. All right. So we left off you talking about how the playbook is. You designed this playbook, how the program works. Big picture, the industry itself, foster care, where does it go? I mean, it has been a broken system for such a long time, not just in this country, but many countries. Where do we go from it? Like, where do we go from here? How do we make changes? How do people get engaged? This is such a big question because there are people that want to foster, but they're afraid because they've heard so many horror stories. There are kids that need to be fostered, but they've had really bad situations. There are great situations on both ends. And people are like, if this wasn't for the proper family, I would have never had the opportunity to be where I am right now, speaking to you, guiding you, running a business, etc. And or the government. Where should the government be fixed? How should it be fixed? So this is like a fully loaded big question. I figured if we were going to come back from a break, boom.
Might as well go big. Totally. Jodi, that's a great question. And actually I've been thinking about that a lot. I just spent the weekend at a summit, specifically thinking through a lot of these questions. And one of the things that I would say as far as thinking about foster care, the 10,000-foot view of foster care, is just realizing that, I think a lot of societal challenges are actually solvable. It's just that we don't have either the right people or the right funds in it, right? So you look at some of the issues that we have in the social sector or the nonprofit space, and they're entirely solvable by a lot of the for-profit businesses or business models or whatever it is, right? But I will say with foster care, I don't think that the foster care system is ever going to go away. You can't eradicate foster care forever. And here's why. Because I think that you need to preemptively address the societal issues that lead to foster care, right? So that's the only way to get rid of foster care. If we solve all of those other things, right? Like lack of access to healthcare and education and all of those other issues that feed into the foster care system. And so I see the foster care system as something that kind of stands in the middle of all these societal challenges that lead people into the foster care system or lead people into losing their kids to the foster care system. And then beyond that, I think right after that, I was mentioning in our other session that it really leads into prison, homelessness, and all of those issues, right? And so, I don't think foster care is going away. And that's just the basic assumption premise that we're working with. And beyond that, as far as like what the solution is, I do think that we can do a lot better. It is a broken system, but this is obviously my opinion, but I think that we can do a lot better for kids while they're still in the system. So if they have to touch the system at all, the goal is to preemptively figure out how we support families before they end up in the system. But once they're in the system, we have to do everything that we can to ensure that, like anyone's kid, or like your own kids, that you're going to treat them with dignity, with, respect, not just the fact that they're a case file or a case number, but that they're literal humans with feelings and, the capacity to absorb a lot of all of the crazy things that happen in foster care. And then that obviously has long-term effects. And so I would say, I think we need to do much better thinking through solutions for kids while they're in the foster care system. None of these issues are unsolvable. We're not looking for the cure to cancer. It's literally, how would you treat your kids if they were, taken away to be taken care of by somebody else? How would you want that person to treat your child? So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it where Foster Nation focuses is really, as they're aging out, thinking through, now they've been through all this trauma, how do we make sure that they feel ready for the real world? And so I think that the approach to addressing some of the issues within foster care specifically is, one, we have to figure out how to stop the bleeding, right? Which is, a big part of stopping the bleeding is thinking through really how we're going to make sure that kids, when they enter the system, don't have as traumatic an experience. And then beyond stopping the bleeding is addressing the actual, wound, which is everything that, all the kids that have been through the system now and whatever trauma they go through, like, how do we make sure that they, at the very least, are set and ready for the real world? I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it was a great way. You answered it extremely well. And the follow-up question to that would be the stigma of foster care. The stigma of mental care is being changed because of the pandemic. What does it take to change the stigma of foster care? Because again, someone's more apt to adopt, go overseas to like engage with like being a parent. Like, I want to be a parent, I will do all these different things. I want to sit there and volunteer and help. I'll do it at a school or at a summer camp. When people hear foster care, they're like, the panic goes up. So how do we eliminate the stigma around foster care, not just the children, but the foster care system?
Yeah. Well, I will say the stigma around the foster care system, the challenge is the stigma exists because a lot of those cases are real or situations are real. And I think, humans by nature tend to gravitate towards the bad side of things, right? And I say that as in, think, for example, when you go on Yelp or you look for reviews of a product, like, people naturally go and look for the bad reviews. And so I think, it probably requires a nationwide media campaign around this to really showcase and put forward incredible foster parents that are doing, I've met foster parents that have had 150 kids come through, cycle through their homes. And I've met incredible foster parents who don't, they don't need the money. And so they save every single penny that the child is, in their care. And then when they turn 18 years old, give them kind of like a starting off fund.
I've heard that, and I love that so much. I mean, I know that all families can't afford to do that, but if you can, even if you took half of that money or a quarter of that money, God, that would make such a big difference.
Huge, exactly. And so, I think it just requires a huge national campaign, kind of like, I'm just trying to think of like an equivalent message, but I do think there needs to be a movement of sorts around, people who are key stakeholders within the child welfare space. So whether they're social workers or foster youth themselves or foster parents, all of the people that kind of, are a part of a child or youth's life as they're going through the system. I think there needs to be a concerted effort to come together and just shed light on the fact that there are good people that are foster parents, and also there are great kids that come out of the system. I think that the challenge is when you tend to see only the bad things. It's like watching the news. Like the news wouldn't, it's not sitting around reporting things that are just, monotonous or boring, right? They're looking for outlier situations, and so a lot of times in the news, even now, you'll see outlier situations of, a horrific incident where a foster child was abused and something horrific happened, or you'll see, a foster youth that's been like, put through the ringer, but then now is doing incredible things, right? And I think, personally for me, I've kind of been on both sides, but I think more on the side of like, look at this, I was the poster child coming out of high school and even in college and coming out of college, I was kind of the poster child for foster care. And to your point, Jodi, it made me really uncomfortable because I just didn't really want to.
You became a marketing tool.
Yeah.
As a marketing person, I'm like, I always tell people, I go, there are times that I'm asked to do things. And I mean, I walk in knowing, I'm like, oh, I know I'm a marketing tool to you. I'm not stupid, but at least I know walking in versus there are people that have no idea. And they're like, why do I feel so odd? What's going on here? I'm like, because the person that's doing it wasn't honest with you.
Right. And that's a really great point. And the thing is, I don't mind being a marketing tool. I think, especially now that I do what I do, I mean, I do it myself, I kind of market my own story. But I think it's that it was so stigmatized at the time. This was a decade ago, that I really didn't want to be associated with it. It kind of comes at a cost to me to be the poster child, which I didn't mind. It was just more like I was thinking I just wasn't so firmly comfortable with who I was at the time. And then on top of that, it was combining that with the fact that foster care is just this, stigmatized thing. And I didn't want anybody who, knew my story or heard my story to think that I was damaged or to think that I was, different from everyone else. Of course, I have a different story, but, and even now, just as an example, I did a segment on the Today Show, and I love the exposure that it gave the organization and the work that we do, but I think it requires that level of, eyeballs on looking at someone who's been through the system and is like, hey, I'm perfectly functional. I'm okay. Could that transition have been easier? Could I have been better off? Maybe, but like we don't all go through the foster care system and come out, quote unquote, damaged.
What does your sister think about this organization that you've developed?
That's a really good question. My sister is really very supportive. Obviously, she and I are very different. We took away from the foster care system day and night. I mean, I'm a pretty optimistic person. I generally trust people that unless you give me a reason not to, I'm going to trust you. She's the opposite. She's like, you can describe her as a feral cat, right? Like she's like, okay.
I swear to God, I didn't even know what feral cat was until I'm obsessed with Yukon Vet on the Disney Plus channel, and this like veteran veterinarian in Australia, and she's a badass. Like, and they have to treat feral cats. I'm like, what the hell's a feral cat? And then she's like, yeah, we sit there and take them and we put them in barns, and that's basically keep all the bears. I'm like, really? I had never heard of feral.
Yeah. Oh, it's a thing. They're basically like kind of like wild rogue cats.
I had never known it. And then I saw it. Well, she's trying to fix it. And I was like, that cat is mean. A mean cat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's my sister. I describe her as a feral cat. I love her, and I wouldn't say she's mean. She's changed a lot, but I think, going through the foster care system the way that she did, and we were separated, and all of those issues kind of compounded, and then it just came out that way, right? And then you couple that with like just typical teen angst, and it was just, it came across as very aggressive if you didn't know her, but she is like a ride or die, right? And so because of that, this organization, she's always been very supportive. Any sort of, event, campaign, anything that we do, she's always really involved in. But I think she's not very eager to jump into this work and dedicate or commit her life to it, because I think there's still a lot of healing that's going on. And even for me, I don't know if I mentioned this, but when I started the organization, it was a very cathartic, and it still is every single day, a very cathartic process and journey. However, the first, I'd say 3 years of starting the organization, I mean, it was really tough, right? For me to actually see everything from this side and realize, oh, I should have gotten this, and I should have had this, and I didn't have these things, right? And by the way, and not in an entitled way, like I deserve these things, but there is now a foster care bill of rights, right? Like there are things that every child deserves, and
Can you talk about the bill of rights, the foster care bill of rights? Because again, people that don't know anything about the foster care system, they only hear the negative part. They don't know that there's legislation. They don't know anything, or when a foster care child is being adopted, then there's a photo in the courtroom with the judge. So can you educate people on what that is?
Sure. So the Bill of Rights is really kind of designed to let foster children and foster parents know that they have rights within the child welfare system, because I think it's basically, I would say before the Bill of Rights came about, it was kind of like you had no idea what you deserved as a child going into a foster home. You don't know what you can ask. Also, you're a child. Like, what do you actually know, right? And I think that's been something that makes a huge difference. And now there's there's a foster children's Bill of Rights in almost every single state. And so, for example, as a kid, when I was going through the system, I didn't know what was right and what was what I deserved, what was normal, what wasn't normal. Like as a kid, you don't know anything, right? And so I think even the idea is that with this Bill of Rights that kids have this posted in a foster home, kind of where they have access, where they can see like, oh, I deserve for to be engaged in like just reasonable, age appropriate activities, right? Like maybe it's going out for a play date with a friend or something like that. Like I had no idea. I just, as a kid, I knew I wasn't allowed sleepovers, and I wasn't allowed a lot of things that regular kids had, and I didn't know why, and so this kind of explains it. And the idea is that foster parents would sit with the kids and explain like, if I'm ever doing anything that's not within these, parameters, like this is your bill. Not that everyone's using it, but the fact that we even have one, at least there's some sort of direction or North Star where people can point to and look.
That I love. And again, we don't know. I mean, like, unless it is something's in your ecosystem, unless you are affected by it, unless you're engaged, people just don't know. So I do love that that the Bill of Rights exists, and I hope that more people sit there and talk about that. Maggie, you send me notes, and I'm trying to talk to you and send you notes at the same time. Oh my God, it's like, so I missed the note. Sorry, wait, I'm gonna read your note. What does it say? Oh, yay. Okay, good. All right, I'm gonna sit there.
I wanted to drop that in there. Just wanted to drop that in there for you. So if you wanted to get, technical and read, because it shows every state's Bill of Rights, and it's a really very interesting, thing.
Okay, this is good to know. All right, thank you. You throw me off because I'm like, because I'm reading your notes. All right, so I have my last question. All right, so I always say this is not the last time because I mean, there's going to be things that I always say there's always things that are in the news, and yes, we can go to academic. Yes, as a former reporter, I can go to any of my reporter friends, but why not engage with the people that I'm interviewing because you guys are like on the ground and you know what's going on. So show the world that you're expert, not just because you run a business, but you're living, breathing this all the time. So why not come to you whenever a story comes up? So be aware this is not the last time, but this is the last question that I have. So we as business owners, offering service providers, we focus so much on our businesses, but we don't focus on ourselves. So I always ask if you had a personal ask and a professional ask of anyone that's listening to you right now, what is your personal ask and what is your professional ask?
That's a good one. Personal and professional ask. Okay. So professional, I would say, a lot of times when people ask me, how can I get involved? The thing I always say is to donate your conversations and donate your connections. And, aside from donating money, I think that obviously as a nonprofit, there's always overhead. That's a huge help. But I think, being able to say to somebody, hey, you know what, like maybe you're done giving money. Maybe you've done all of that. How else can you get engaged? Whether it's a dinner conversation or whether you're a listener to this and you share this video or podcast with somebody, the idea is to really use the network effect to then help us amplify this, the cause and raising awareness about this. So that's the first part. I think professional ask is always, I always say, when I speak to a group of people, I always ask like, can you raise your hand if you're in this room, wherever we are, because of the support of somebody else, whether it's a friend, a parent, a teacher, a social worker, whoever it is. And almost always, I'd say 90+% of people raise their hands because we all need somebody in our corner. And so I think the professional ask is really whether you get involved with Foster Nation or get involved in the child welfare system in another way, figure out ways to get involved, right? Like you had somebody growing up or maybe as an adult who helped you get to where you are today. So pay that forward and, figure out a way and educate yourself on how to pay that forward, and support somebody who's going through it now. So that's the professional ask. Personal ask. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. You're totally right. I'm like drawing a blank on what I would ask for personally. I don't really know. I don't know what to tell you. So much, and you're totally right, by the way, so much of our identities sometimes are, tied to the work that we do, particularly if you're really passionate and love what you do. So those two things are very linked to me and I don't even know how to separate them. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really tough one. What do people say?
Literally, it's random. I mean, sometimes I had a woman that she's like, I have a teenage son. Everyone talks about teenage girls and they like to get the moody stage. She's like, boys do it too. I'm a single mom. I have no idea what to do. Any advice? People have asked for recipes. People have asked for they just ask for random things. Like the day of, you never know what you need. So I don't know. It could be anything. It's random.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So I guess that's a really, thanks for the examples. That really helped. I'm like scratching my head here. Okay. So one thing I do love that I do, for example, as self-care is I read a lot, right? So I read both fiction, nonfiction, everything in between. I'm always reading like 3 books at the same time. And so, yeah, if there's a book that has changed your life or, anyone who's listening, reading, whatever, would love recommendations. I think that for me, anytime that somebody, tells me about a book that they're like, oh, this has changed my life, or this has been instrumental in X, for me, that would be amazing. Because I read voraciously, but I always think that when it has that kind of a profound impact on someone's life, it's likely to be a very good book. Like I have sitting here next to me right now 2 books that are that have been recommended to me by friends and also people that have written. So Build, something that I'm working on. The guy who created the iPod, iPhone, he's amazing. And then this one. So you see, I always have like kind of like a book that teaches me to be better professionally, and then a book that's like, how do I grow personally. So love any recommendations.
All right, the first one, I definitely want to get the first one. All right, so I'm going to give you my 3 books that I always recommend. The Year of Yes by Chandra Rhimes. She was challenged to literally say yes for an entire year, and all these different opportunities came out of nowhere because she said she was so busy, she said no to everything. Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. It's so interesting how our world has been changed and how there are groups of individuals that do not exist. There's just no history of them because either guns, germs, or steel like annihilated an entire population. And of course, Malcolm Gladwell's Outlier, because that's a no-brainer for us because it's such a good one. I've read it a few times, and each time I read it, depending where I am in my life, I discover something new. So that one's a really good one because we're A types and because we are outliers, we're constantly reminded that we need to continue to be outliers.
Absolutely. I love that book and I have read that one. I haven't read the other two, so I'm excited. It's amazing. I think I heard of the concept of the Year of Yes, and she probably, came up with that, but that's generally how when people ask me for professional career advice, whatever it is, that's generally my motto. It's not so much saying yes to everything, but truly being open minded to every single opportunity
Exactly.
that comes your way, because you just don't know where it's going to lead you.
100%. All right. There is one small question. What is something that you missed out when you were a child that you do now and you love it so much? Because you're like, I didn't get to do this as a kid and now I love it.
Such a great question. I actually have on my to-do list, you're going to laugh. I have on my to-do list, make a list of all the things that you wanted to do as a child that you didn't get to do. And it's funny because on this list, I have things like paint, piano, and learn French. So, yeah, by the way, I'm not doing any of those things yet. It's aspirational. It's aspirational. We all have to have a North Star, right? But I will say for me, the thing that I do now, and this is going to sound really silly, and my sister, I can think of my sisters quicker than I can think of mine because this is how my brain works. And I feel like I am very responsible for her, but for her, just as an example, and then I'll give mine, it's being able to go into a bakery and like buy a slice of cake. I know it sounds really silly, but
that's perfect though.
Yeah, like
that's a big deal.
As kids, we used to be dropped off at the mall just with no money, and then we just walk around and we couldn't do anything, couldn't really eat anything. And so that's something for her. And it's a very specific bakery, but she's like, the fact that I can like go in and buy a $12 slice of cake, she's like, is like the biggest treat to me. It makes me so happy. So I love that. There's, that version. And then for me, just something that I always wanted to, I guess you can say, do as a child was, I always thought it was strange that I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers, and so a lot of times, the friends that I have, I'm very close with, and those close friends, like I love a good sleepover. I'm like a grown adult, love a good sleepover, and we're not even doing anything that's that you can do separately on your own at home, but it's just something about like the fun of I don't know, like staying up late and, gossiping or just having candy. Like I would never sit at home and eat candy by myself at 2 a.m. But like with a friend, I might do that. Right. So that's something that, that for sure is one of those things. And then the other thing that I'll say is just being able to, it sounds again really silly, but being able to own books. Like when I was a child, I was obsessed with reading, and the Scholastic Book Fair, like
oh my God, when you got to fill in the little paper and you got to be, oh my God, I loved it.
How do we bring that back? Anyway, so that was like one of my outlets was books. And a lot of times I would get dropped off at a public library, which, by the way, I love libraries. Don't get me wrong. I'm obsessed with libraries, actually. It's a weird thing. But it would make me really sad that I would have to give back a book, right? Or, and now whenever people ask me where is home, right? Because I've moved all over the place. I lived in a lot of different places. It's the way that I think of where home is, it's always, where my books are. And so the fact that like I can own books and I can make notes in them and highlight them and write in them is something that is, to me, just, amazing.
I love the moments of just like things that we weren't allowed to do. Like for us, we weren't allowed to sit in the front of the stoops. Like we would watch other kids, like everyone's like sitting in the front stoop of their house, and our parents were like, you're not allowed to do that. We're like, why? Like, we don't do that. I'm like, where? Like, get in the backyard. And so for us, our cousins, we do that, and we're like, we're in front of the stoop. We're in front of the stoop, and it's so exciting. It's so exciting. And for the books, I wrote a children's book, and every year I donate 100 of them to schools that I'll just randomly pick a school in America, because for me as a former teacher back in the day, it breaks my heart that someone doesn't own a book, their own personal book. And so for me, that's so important to make sure that kids have at least one book. I'll be happy, because that book can change your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Thank you so much, Jodi.
No, well, I was gonna say, I'm gonna stop talking because this is our mark, because you keep talking and I'm like, it's not me this time. It's not me this time. But you, Maggie, you are so amazing. You're fun. You're engaging. You're relatable. You're doing great work. Like, I mean, holy shit bag. You're doing great work. See, we don't want to say the F word, but we can say the S word. But I mean, I don't know. Whenever people like throw an F bomb, I'm like, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. I'll let you do everything else, but we don't have to do that. But I really do appreciate what you do. And as I said last time, I want to volunteer. I want to be one of your mentors. I mean, I mentor all over. This is such a great, amazing way to sit there and help and engage. And whatever I can do to support you, I will do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jodi. First of all, thank you for even just, providing this platform. I think you're already being so helpful, because I think a big part of raising awareness is really just, getting the word out there, having these conversations. So this has already been amazing. And the other parts I will definitely follow up, and you're part of the tribe now, so you're in it.
No, I mean, thank you. You're based in, where are you based?
I'm based in Austin, but I'm also.
Oh my God, what a great place to be!
Yeah,
great place to be.
Our headquarters based in LA, and so I'm there quite often. I probably am there once a month.
Okay, so the next time I will be in California is for my cousin's wedding in October. So I will plan around. So like if we can be there at the same exact time, but I mean literally, like, you have me for whatever you need.
Amazing. October, actually, I feel like something's happening in October. Something's always happening for us. Yeah, I think something's happening in October. I'll figure it out, but I will reach out to you.
All right, cool. But I mean, obviously, not you, because you're busy. One of your people, reach out to me, let me know what I can do and when the next session is, and I'm on your schedule.
Yeah, our next cohort actually starts in February of 2023, and our goal I mentioned earlier is to set up a partnership with the Department of Children and Family Services and figure out a way to work with youth once when they're like between 16 and 18, so that they're really ready when they turn 18 and age out. So would love to count you in on that.
Yes. And how many cohorts do you have per year?
So we have one, and it's a 9-month program.
Okay.
Yeah. So this year is our pilot cohort, and we started with 80. So 40.
That's a lot.
Yeah, 40 dyads, so 40 foster youth and 40 professionals, and then or career coaches. And then this next year, we're hoping to scale that to really 2x it. So
I have a lot of mentors that I work with that would probably be very interested as well.
Amazing. I'm going to send you all of the information on CareerX right after this. And then we'll go from there.
Beautiful. Thank you, my love. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much for part 2. So happy.
So fun. Love your vibe, by the way. Just know that. I'm like you. I feel like I've been doing. I just did another like a show podcast interview thing yesterday, and just like sometimes it's like pulling teeth, and then other times
I know,
goes so easily, and so this is like anytime, however I can be helpful, please let us know. And then also when this is ready to go and all of that, we'll share it with our community and our.
Oh my God. I mean, like, again, my biggest thing is when I was in the media, I want to hear all of the story and we let you talk. Nowadays it's so short that I'm like, I need more. And so just all the information you told, not only about your life, but just again, I worked at summer camps when I was younger. We had kids that went through the foster care system, or they were at camp the special time before they were taken away from their family. We didn't know. You just gave so much more context to what I've known throughout my life. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again.
Okay, and have a great day. Have a great weekend. Enjoy.
Yay. Thank you so much. I'll follow up with you and then we'll chat soon, I'm sure.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, honey. Bye.
What exactly does Foster Nation do?
It really means making sure that their basic needs are met and also making sure that they have a support network and mentorship.
During the pandemic, Foster Nation provided meals for foster youth and maintains ongoing campaigns for clothing and hygiene products. It's also developed a mentorship program called Career X that matches volunteer and trained mentors to help teach basic life and professional skills. Christian Conoco is one of those mentees.
I didn't have the skills or resources on, how to get into colleges or how to set up retirement, or even still to this day, like I struggle with basic things like how to make a doctor's appointment.
Christian lived in more than 30 foster homes during his childhood, and with Foster Nation's help, he now has a master's degree and works as an architect. Maggie says it's stories like his that keep her encouraged.
How can we help?
If you take the time to donate your conversations and small talk about foster care, you might be shocked how that has a ripple effect and helps people do something about the problem, whether they become volunteers, donors, or foster parents.